welcome to the Oceans of Learning podcast, celebrating our seas and raising awareness around the importance of Ireland's marine resources. For episode 2, we're focusing on our ocean, our livelihoods, and how our ocean economy supports a truly diverse range of jobs and livelihoods. So the potential for the Irish people and businesses in terms of what we can get from our oceans is just absolutely massive. So we're going to hear some great stories now from a really just diverse range of jobs. We've got an Irish Navy diver to someone working in cosmeceuticals as a master formulator. We'll be looking at the renewable energy sector and even food safety as well. But first, let's hear from Tracey Ryan, the managing director and master formulator at Codex Beauty Europe. I guess I want to start with, you have the coolest job title. So herbal alchemist formulator. Can you tell us a little bit what that means?
Sure, no worries. It sounds very Harry Potter, doesn't it? So I suppose I did my degree in herbal science. I've always been just completely fascinated by plants ever since I was a young girl. I've studied horticulture. I'm currently studying cosmetic chemistry. So I suppose what a herbologist or a master formulator does is I put together the formulations for Codex Beauty. Our products are primarily plant-based. So, I would do the research on what plants we're going to use and what formats we're going to use them in and put the formulations together for us.
That's really cool. I love that literally as we're talking about it as well, I can see that you have some plants in
Ireland.
I'm like, I wonder what it's for.
Everywhere.
And that's really cool. And obviously, like I'd be a big fan of kind of natural skincare and stuff myself. And it's very cool to see over the last few years that industry is really growing, I guess. And one of the interesting things I thought when I looked up Codex Beauty in particular is obviously that's a very international brand, but with a very Irish focus. Is there a particular thought behind that?
Yeah, so I ran a small skincare company called Beauty for about 7 years in Ireland, straight after I came out of college, making skincare here from like natural native ingredients. And in 2018, we were bought out by Codex Beauty Labs. Their CEO, Barb, approached us and said that she was really interested in like skincare lines from around the world that were inspired by like their native plants and their native kind of herbal knowledge. So we stood out to her as the Irish example of that. So we joined Codex Beauty, and we were really encouraged to further develop our products and really draw on as much inspiration from Irish native ingredients and Irish herbal knowledge as we could, which is like literally what I'm obsessed with anyway. So we really kind of elevated the Bia line within Codex to bring in Irish seaweeds and plants, and it's been fantastic. Codex has other lines from different parts of the world, but we're the Irish line.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's amazing. And I guess I'd love to know a bit more about the Irish extracts that you are using. So we talked with one of our other guests a little bit about how the kind of rise of the seaweed industry and all the amazing different kind of applications of the compounds from different seaweeds. I noticed you guys use, I think, is it serrated rack in some of your pieces?
Yeah, we do. We use serrated rack and we use bladder rack. They're the two main ones we use at the moment. So many benefits for the skin in there. I suppose it's things like the fucoidins that we're really interested in, great anti-inflammatory benefits, like lots of studies that show they can like help stimulate collagen growth, help protect the collagen. And like collagen is the holy grail in skincare, really. It's what keeps our skin like firm and young looking. So anything that can help there is great. We're also interested in like the antioxidant benefits from it. You've got like beta carotenes and vitamin E, and again, another big name in the skincare world, antioxidants. They like fight the free radicals, help with aging on the skin. So many different things. Iodine in there. Alginic acid is another really interesting one for us. Like it's a humectant, and humectants in skincare are the things that like draw moisture to the skin. So a lot of people, when they put on their moisturizer, they may think the oils and things like that are hydrating them, but they're not. They're like what we call occlusive. They stop us losing moisture. But to get moisture in our skin, we need humectants. Like things like hyaluronic acid is the really famous example, glycerine, but alginic acid is another really lovely humectant. It like draws water to the surface of the skin and gives us that lovely like plump, dewy kind of thing that everybody wants going on with their skin. So some amazing things really for us in those seaweeds, and that's why we use them.
That's really cool. And in fairness, I feel like before I used to definitely just kind of slap the stuff on my face and hope for the best. But my my stepdad is actually in kind of bio cosmeceuticals, if that's the right phrase. From Brazil. So one of the ways that we were even kind of bonding is that he was telling me about these are all the different plants that grow where I'm from, and this is what we use them for in skincare. So I was really excited then to chat to you, because I was like, now I can tell you about the Irish version of it.
Amazing.
So that's very cool. But sorry, just to take it back there. You mentioned some of the extracts there. Like, how do you even know, or if this makes sense, how do you even know which ones to target, or kind of how do you get an idea when you're like, okay, we're going to work with this species of plant, here's what we hope to gain from it? Or
So I guess it all starts with the research. You know, the marketing team will come to us with an idea about what they want for a product. Then we'll have to look at what that product needs to do, what kind of performance it has to have. And then we go back to our research. Like, what do we know about the different plants or the seaweeds? What are the constituents in them? What do those constituents do? How do we get the constituents out? Because it's not good enough just to say, well, like, you know, this plant or this seaweed has this constituent, but how are we going to get it out, and how are we going to make sure it's active? So there's a lot of work goes on there in terms of research. We go back through research papers. At Codex, we have a herbal advisory board. So like, it's myself and some of my lecturers from college, from CIT, who are practicing medical herbalists. We have a great team, cosmetic chemists as well. And we really go through the research and have a look at like what extracts are out there, what sort of constituents do they have, how are they going to work, how are they best formulated, like are they water soluble, oil soluble, solvent extract, like what way will we extract them, how will they be active in the product?
Kind of, I guess it's really cool to know that you're kind of using I guess Irish plants within your work. Is that something new? Is there a history of things being used like that in Ireland, or could you tell us about that?
Yeah, we do. We have a really long history in terms of, you know, people using herbs in Ireland for all sorts of medicinal reasons. What's actually really unique about Ireland is that we have a written history and an oral history of the use of herbs that goes like all the way back to like Tuatha Danann talk. You know, our first herbalist was Armid in the stories, and
Yeah,
you know, I love that story. So we have this really long history of the use of herbs. We also had things like the Folklore Commission back in, I don't know, was it the 50s or 60s, where they went around Ireland and they asked people what were the cures in their communities, what were the things that were passed down. And we have such a rich history of using herbs. We also, you know, we would have had professional herbalists back in like in Middle Ages in Ireland. We've an amazing history of the use of herbs in Ireland.
Really cool. And in terms of like the seaweeds and stuff as well, would they have been like, I know in the past I've read lots about how they were used for kind of fertilizer on farms, and obviously Ireland and Wales have a very old history of maybe using them in food. Were they being used in that same kind of cure way that you're talking about? Were they being used in skincare or health? Do you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And things like bats, like very simple use of seaweed as well. Like things like the use of bats goes back a long way into our past. A really simple way that anybody can gather seaweed and can use it and get the kind of benefits for their skin out of it. Yeah, there's a long history of that for sure.
So like I was saying, we kind of, you had that great example of the kind of the folklore. I love that idea of a folklore team making sure that things aren't lost.
Yeah.
But so is that something that there was kind of like a gap in, and now we're recovering that knowledge, or is that something that's kind of been built on over time?
Yeah, it's something that there's a lot of work being done on in Ireland. So I did a degree in herbal medicine and CIT, and it was like a really new course. I think we were like the second or third year of people to graduate from the course, because there had been like a loss of knowledge around herbal medicine in Ireland. I mean, there was a lot of like cures and stories passed down in neighborhood, but like the real kind of learned experience of herbal medicine, like some of it had been lost for sure. So there's a fantastic team of medical herbalists in Ireland who put together the course that I studied. So it's a 4-year degree in herbal science. Like it covers everything from anatomy and physiology and everything you would do on like a, you know, biological sciences degree, but it brings in things like, you know, we would have courses called Materia Medica, where we learn about all of the plants and the extracts that we have available to us, and we learn how to research what constituents are there and what they can do, and we look at the different you know, research that's out there in clinical trials around herbs. So it's great. It's really bringing the scientific element back into it, because sometimes when I tell people that I studied herbal medicine, they think, oh, well, you were out in the field picking flowers and making tea.
And in fairness, I was actually going to ask, and I'm very curious to know, do you pick some of the stuff yourself? And obviously you have a bit of a connection to the sea there. Are you kind of, are you working on that too?
Of course, like I've always been a forager. I think I've been foraging since I was about 8 or 9 years of age. I grew up in Tipperary, so not by the sea, but I have lived by the sea during different parts of my life. And absolutely, I've always been a forager. But I think it's lovely to bring that kind of foraging and instinctual and very basic kind of idea of herbalism, but to bring a real scientific edge to it as well, and to get people to understand that where did we get any of our medicines from? It all came from plants originally. Plants were used, and then things were extracted from plants, and then they were isolated, and then they were synthesized and whatever, but it came from the plants originally. So it might sound like a bit of hocus pocus to people, but there's real science there, and I think our degree did that. It brought the two sides together, which was badly needed.
No, completely. And I know myself, even sometimes when I've brought friends on like a little seashore walk, and then maybe I've explained, okay, well, so that was the seaweed actually that you had in your seaweed bath, but this is the one that you eat. And if you have thyroid issues, this is the one you can't have because they have loads of iodine in it. And they're like, same kind of thing. They're like, oh my God, yeah, it's starting to see the science behind it, as well as the kind of traditional uses and stuff of them as well. So you're originally a Tipperary woman yourself, but you said you also lived by the sea. Where were you living when you were kind of more
So
coastal?
I lived in Mayo for quite a while, up near Blacksod, and I spent some time around Belmullet. And yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, it's some of the most gorgeous stretches of sea. Not crowded. You have it all to yourself. So yeah, absolutely fabulous part of the country. I also go to Enniscrone and Sligo quite a bit as well,
Okay,
which of
cool.
course is famous for its seaweed baths, which I love.
Oh my God. And actually, those ones, I was thinking that we were telling the listeners a little bit about seaweed baths. The one in Enniscrone is fantastic because I think they are the really traditional old ones, aren't they?
There you are. They're the Edwardian ones. Like they're proper old school. You can sit inside in the wooden box and steam yourself, and then you get into this big porcelain bath with the big taps. I think it's a proper old style
Yeah,
experience.
completely. And Tracey, one last question before I let you go. One that we've been kind of asking everyone on the podcast is for our listeners, is there kind of one tip, one takeaway that you would have for them, something that they can kind of help do to protect our oceans?
I guess for me, it's talking to your children. I have two young boys, 10 and 5, and just talking to them and explaining about the importance of the oceans and how, the small things that we do in our own lives, like cutting down on plastic, watching how much plastic we consume, things like that can actually make a massive difference. And I mean, if we can get our kids to understand it and see the importance of it, that's going to go a long way.
Amazing. Tracey, thanks so much for joining me.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
And our next guest is Talia Britton. Like our other guests, her life and work has centered around the ocean, so much so that in 2020 she became Ireland's first female Navy diver. Talia is here with me now to chat a little bit more about what inspired her to join the Navy.
Actually, whenever I initially joined back in 2014, I had no idea that I actually had familial ties to the Navy. And it was my great uncle, Robert Morrow, who's my granny's brother. He served in the Royal Navy as a surgeon captain. So he was a doctor within the Royal Navy. And when he retired from the Navy, he actually left the rank of surgeon captain. So to put it into perspective, Commander Roberto O'Brien, he was one rank ahead of her, but obviously he's surgeon captain, so it's a doctor's rank within the Royal Navy, which is really nice because I actually had no idea whenever I joined. And it was only after I joined that he kind of got in contact with my dad and stuff and said that it was really, really nice that there was still someone in the family who's kind of following in the kind of the naval footsteps and things like that. So I suppose that was kind of a really nice moment for us as a family. And then I got commissioned in 2016, and I was hoping that he'd actually be there for it, but unfortunately, he actually passed away this summer, just literally like 2 months just before I was commissioned as an officer. But he'd actually given me his sword. So officers have swords. So like obviously we have different ones in the Irish Navy or Irish Naval Service compared to the Royal Navy. But on this particular occasion, because of the familial ties, I was actually allowed to use his sword for my own commissioning ceremony and everything. So it was a really, really nice kind of, I suppose, like the heritage there, or that kind of moment for me. But yeah, it was good for my whole family too, I think.
You recently became a Navy diver as well. So was that kind of like additional training on top of the degree that you already did? I think we've kind of heard about it a little bit in Ireland. It's crazy things like a 70% failure rate. Sounds like Navy SEALs to me. It's really cool. Could you tell us a little bit about that and maybe what it felt like when you actually received your logbook as well?
I'm just putting a full disclaimer right there. I am not claiming to be a Navy SEAL at all.
No, completely. Don't worry, totally understand.
Yeah, the training, like, so it's not part of the degree, and it's not something that you have to do if you join the Navy at all. It was just something that was always on my radar, that I kind of was just like, whenever I joined the Navy, I was like, no, that's something. I always kind of looked at the naval diving sections like, I want to do that, something that I always had my sights set on. I kind of always find that like I was always really drawn to like anyone who was in the Navy, like in the diving section, just always wanted to ask questions. If I ended up on a ship or bumped into someone who was a diver, I was always asking, what's it like, what you do, like what's the training like, and you kind of just develop a sort of an awareness then, or what you think is awareness of what you're getting yourself into whenever you're asking all the questions. But wasn't particularly anything to do with my actual nautical science degree. So that came afterwards. I actually had to finish all my training before I could apply for the course through work. And once I did that, so it kind of comes up in a thing called our routine orders. So that's where they publish all the different courses that are available to people. So I went through that point. But obviously, like I said, it's always been on my radar, so it wasn't something that I kind of was just like, oh yeah, I'm just going to give it a go.
So I'm just kind of curious because I think I read a lot about online about and I'll ask you maybe a little bit after as well about what the Navy divers do. But I saw some very cool footage of like it looked like you were all in some kind of decompression tank, and then there was some kind of like course that was being followed while everyone was in like full dive gear. So just in terms of like, was it like a year-long course, a 10-week course, and kind of what did you actually do while you were doing your dive training?
So the course is initially supposed to be like 11 weeks. So that's for your basic air diving. So that's like kind of like your scuba, but like it's more based on a working aspect. So initially for the first 2 weeks, you'd end up covering like physical training. So you do anything like water circuits to long fin swims, you bring your running. They're just trying to build up your own physical endurance for the first 2 weeks. So you don't actually do any diving, so you're not actually under the water, you're in the water, but you're not under it for the first two. The third week, which is also the first week of diving, we covered something called lifeline signals. So that's the first time we were actually introduced to going underwater, and then you need to learn all the different signals. Obviously, there's no communications underwater, so everything's done through lines. So we call them poles and bells. So you know what to do whenever you're tethered to the line of which way someone wants to send you and which way to go. After that, we move on to something called jack stay, which is the lines set out in a cordon underwater, and you're to work along those lines. It's pretty much to send you out to do certain jobs and things like that if you were looking for where you had to go underwater. After that, we moved on to something called ship's bottom search or hull survey. So we learned how to start either the bow of the ship or the stern of the ship and to go under, and you literally have to work as a team kind of searching the entire length of the ships. So from that aspect, obviously, because yes, I've been working on ships for the last few years, but I've never really paid much attention to the hull of the ship or the bottom of the ship. Yes, I'd seen it in like a dry dock and things, but I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of cool. Yeah, there's a propeller and there's a rudder. It's not until you're actually right there touching it all that you're like, oh my God, these things are massive. Or, you don't take an appreciation for where the different parts of equipment are on the ship until I think you've actually been under it and you're able to feel your way with your hands the whole way along. That's actually only brings up to week 5. After that, you go into different aspects. We call it like we do different types of searches. So whether they're key wall searches, circular searches, so those things would be utilized obviously if we're clearing a key wall for just say foreign vessels or anything like that, for anything that could potentially be placed along a key wall.
So that's kind of like a safety thing for ships coming in.
Yeah, 100%. We kind of do that, but then there's obviously circular searches. You learn in different searching techniques because you need these obviously if you're doing whether you're just doing search for an object, or obviously if you're doing a search and recovery, and if you're looking for someone, there's different types of search techniques that we would have been doing.
So Talia, we probably have some, or I'd say we nearly definitely do have some paddy divers listening here. I've done my own open water. I imagine it's very minimal training by comparison, but I'd just love to know a little bit about when you actually received that logbook. What was it like, or was there kind of a ceremony or anything?
Yeah, it was really nice. So like the last 2 weeks of our training, we were actually brought to a place called Bay Island, so it's down in West Cork, and we kind of like everything that we'd learned from surface supply to the key wall searches, the underwater searches, and things to do with the recompression chamber that you were asking me about earlier on. All of that was kind of tied in together. And it was just kind of, suppose, like, sorry, Hell Week if it's 2 weeks long, but it was kind of like everything amalgamated, just to kind of test us. And the days were very, very long. But on the last day, we were actually run to, there's this hill, to me it felt like a mountain. It took so long to get to the top, but there's a cross at the top that marks the highest point on Bear Island, and it was there that they actually awarded us our diving badges. I suppose that was kind of like the greatest, like the best feeling, I suppose, because like we'd all kind of made it to the top, we kind of got there, and yeah, they stood there and they kind of handed us out our white flashes. So this was one that we were all given out.
Cool.
And it was really, really overwhelming, because it was like a long process. Like, I know I'd said that it was 11 weeks, but my course actually had to deal with the COVID pandemic. So we actually started in like February, then it stopped in March, and it didn't restart again until June. And we didn't actually end up finishing until August. So because of that, there was a lot of kind of misconceptions, like, is it going ahead? Is it not? Are we ever going to get it finished? Or are we going to have to restart it all again next year? So there was that kind of feeling. So whenever it was actually completed, it was just really, really overwhelming for everybody.
No, that's really, really cool. And I can imagine that, because then it goes from being 11 weeks to like maintaining the same level of probably physical fitness and stress the whole way through. That's very intense. And I'm just curious to know, obviously you've such a cool job within the Navy, and we really enjoyed talking to Roberta kind of about her job and how she got into it as well. For anyone, maybe we've got quite a broad listenership, for any of the kind of younger people listening, that would maybe be thinking of joining in either the commissioned or the non-commissioned ranks. Any piece of advice you might give to them?
Yeah. The Navy is like, or even just the Defence Force in general, it's definitely something I do think everyone should try, or that everyone is capable for. Like, to me, like, this, maybe I'm being very, very biased here, because I actually I really do enjoy my job. I do feel like it is a career for everyone. There's many various avenues that you can go down, if you join, whether it's commissioned or non-commissioned. Like, if you apply yourself, you can achieve whatever you want within the Navy, and it does give you the sense, you can get a sense of adventure, you can get a sense of accomplishment from it, or anything like that. So I do think it's something that, especially people who might be like in school and I'm not really sure what I want to do, there's no problem in actually trying it. I think today is very different now. Like, people used to look at, like, I suppose, all jobs as careers a long time ago, but now it's more kind of like, oh, I can chop and change my job. If I want to, if I can try it, and if I don't like it, I can move on to something else. I do think that's something that we kind of have to embrace now, that people aren't going to stay in one job or one career forever. Not saying that, like, at the moment I'm not planning on leaving or anything. I really do enjoy my job, but one bit of advice is to say that everyone should give it a go, or if you're not sure what you want to do, you don't need to be an Olympian. They're not looking for the fittest people on earth to join. You'll get your training. Everyone starts at a basic level and kind of gets built up from there. So if you any misconceptions, or if you're afraid of joining for just say even physical fitness reasons or anything like that, I'd say I wouldn't worry about that kind of thing. You should, if you can apply yourself, you can achieve absolutely anything within the Defence Forces.
Very cool, Talia. I love it. And so one last question, obviously you achieved something very exciting last year. Any kind of hopes or goals within your work for the coming year?
Just at the moment, I'm coming to the end of my sea time. So within the Navy, you do 2 years at sea, generally 2 years in a shore-based job. So I'm actually coming to the end of my sea rotation. So at the moment, I'm just waiting to see where the wind blows me and what direction I'm going to be taking from my shore-based job. Yeah, I don't know. Nothing, no other mad plans at the minute. I think I'm just kind of quite happy to see how it's going for now.
Yeah, cool. No, totally. Talia, thanks so much for joining us on the show.
No problem at all. Thank you so much for having me.
Developing Ireland's marine economic potential while also regulating and protecting our very delicate offshore environment is a difficult balance to strike. But key to this is Jo Silke, Director of Marine Environment and Food Safety Services at the Marine Institute. I'm chatting to Jo now to find out more.
We have a number of different roles in the Marine Institute, from measuring fish stocks and oceanography. We have the two national research vessels, soon to be joined next year, hopefully by a new vessel which is currently being built. And a number of other roles then with regards to funding and various other aspects of providing advice and services to government. But my own particular area is marine environment and food safety.
Okay, cool. And I guess so when you're kind of talking about food safety, are we talking about like aquaculture and kind of things coming in from there? Or is it also kind of what's coming in from fisheries? Is it testing?
Yes,
how does it work?
exactly. We have okay, so within marine environment and food safety, we have a number of different roles. Most of them are very closely associated with legislation that we have to adhere to. So marine environmental legislation and food safety legislation. So we're talking about seafood. Okay, so a lot of this is to do with the aquaculture industry. For instance, you mentioned the seafood safety aspect of the work that we're doing. A large portion of that will be to do with shellfish safety. So we have a thriving aquaculture industry around the coast. They estimate that the aquaculture industry is worth about 46% of the total value of seafood that's been produced in Ireland.
Wow, that's really
and
high.
most of that is coming from the salmon and the oyster industry. So we have to make sure that the food that is being produced, that it's of the top quality, that it's safe to put on the market. Now, with shellfish, from time to time, they become unsafe to eat. This is just a natural part of their life cycle. Shellfish filter food from the water. They actually filter particles called phytoplankton. These are plant plankton that are floating in the water naturally, and that's the food of filter feeding shellfish. Now, like all plants, there's a number of them are toxic.
Yeah,
So,
of course.
like on the land, we have some plants that produce poisons,
So
and
these
it's
would
the
be
exact
the
same
kind
in
of
the
toxic
sea.
algal blooms that we'd be hearing about every once in a while in the summer.
That's it. Yes, we do get blooms of some of these species, and when they're present in the water, because the shellfish are filtering these out, they become unsafe to eat. So we have a monitoring program right around the coast, week in, week out, all the year round, to ensure that the shellfish that are going to market, that they are safe. So that's part of the work that we do in my section.
And I guess what kind of talking about blooms and things like that, we're also thinking about water quality. Is that kind of part of what you're doing as well there in the Marine Institute?
It is. So working backwards, I suppose, from the shellfish, we're checking the water to see what toxic species of phytoplankton are in the water. So that's another monitoring program that we have. So this is taking water samples and checking them to see what, are the phytoplankton, are they good ones, or are the toxic ones, and then we can give some sort of a prediction as to what's likely to happen in the next week or two. If there's a toxic bloom present, we can look at that and give that kind of prediction. But apart from that, we're also looking then at water quality. So again, as I said, all of these are driven by directives. So we have the Water Framework Directive and the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. So these again are two pieces of legislation that we work very closely with the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage in carrying out monitoring around the coast and checking water samples to see what levels of contamination are present in the water.
Yeah, completely, Joe. And in fairness, Ireland kind of looks at water quality and testing at a very impressive scale. I know myself, I surf, and I've surfed in America and Mexico, and even just after a little bit of rainfall, you'll be out of the water for days, even weeks sometimes, because they're having such poor water quality issues.
Like, I mean, we're very lucky, I suppose, in the location where we are. We're right out on the edge of Europe. Um, and that's not saying that we don't need to protect the water. Like, I mean, but like, I mean, we do have a very good environment to start with. We're in a perfect location for activities, like you mentioned there, like surfing and all of the tourism activities that occur around the sea. So we really do have to mind this, and making sure that we have adequate monitoring in place is really, really important. It's important for us, and it's important, for future generations.
Completely, I guess.
They say the custodians of the environment, but it is really important that we carry out these activities to make sure that we protect what we have.
Yeah, and I guess, and kind of talking about that custodian idea, like for you personally, what is your kind of background, your connection to the ocean? Have you always lived by the sea, or where did that come
Yeah.
from?
I think it was in my blood from the time I was born. I grew up in Galway. We were right beside the River Corrib. So my childhood was spent either on, in, or around water. I was either, paddling in the river or out in Salt Hill beside. And so then as, my time came to decide what I was going to do, it was kind of obvious that I was going to have something to do with water. So I started off in GMIT, or RTC Galway as it was back in them days. And give my age away, but yeah, so I studied aquatic biology to start with, and then I continued in Trinity with a master's in marine environment.
Cool. And you're back based in Galway now.
Back in Galway now, and I've worked with the Marine Institute since the very early days. We're based in Renewable. We've got a fantastic location and premises in Renewable, 54 different laboratories, right out, surrounded by the sea. So it's a fantastic place to work. And we have really state-of-the-art equipment. We have, as I said, laboratories with the top quality equipment, so that we're able to monitor the environment, monitor seafood safety using state-of-the-art methods. We also have our research vessels, which are a really great asset. We're able to get out onto the continental shelf and further afield. I've been across the Atlantic on the Celtic Explorer doing research. So it is, we are very well kitted out with infrastructure to carry out our work.
Absolutely. And I guess all of that data and everything that you guys are kind of collecting and monitoring is really feeding into kind of all of the end users that are working in our marine economy. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about, say, the importance of that to local communities, or also, I guess, the importance of the sustainability side of it as well?
Yeah, well, the aquaculture industry, as I mentioned, it's quite important where it's located. The shellfish part of aquaculture is worth probably around 50 million, just slightly more than 50 million a year. So while that wouldn't, I'm just talking about shellfish now, well, that wouldn't be a huge, amount of money nationally if you think about it. It's where it's located that makes it really important. We're talking about local communities, villages, small areas around the coast where there aren't maybe a huge amount of other options, where there mightn't be industry or close to towns and cities for people to work. So I think the development of the aquaculture industry over the past decades has been really kind of important in keeping those local communities together. And the support then that we provide through the monitoring
Completely.
and making sure that
And in fairness,
quality is good, make sure that that will remain intact.
absolutely. And you can kind of see as well, I know for myself, either I know some oyster fishermen in farmers, I guess, in Sligo, and then I work in Killybegs as well. So we really see how that kind of chain of employment goes from like the people tending or harvesting to processing, and it's kind of creating a lot of jobs in kind of smaller rural towns. Obviously,
Yeah.
marine kind of planning is something that's going to be kind of integral to that. We know that there's a marine area planning bill going through the Dáil at the moment. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and this is again a new area that we are again involved in with the Department of Housing. local government and heritage, and our own parent department, Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine. So the marine spatial planning activities that we're involved in, this is preparing and delivering factual information to the government and to the public on the different activities that are coexisting in the marine. Okay, so everything from fisheries through to seaweed harvesting, sports, recreation, telecommunications. If you think about all of the different activities, wastewater, the new energy, renewable energy from in the marine, and aquaculture and energy, and and defense, everything that is coexisting in the sea, making sure that it can all coexist harmoniously, and that that there is a plan. So this is similar to the planning acts that we have on the land. We're now moving into the sea and making sure that that there is a place for everybody, and that when activities are being planned, that they're being planned with logic in mind, and making sure that things can coexist well together.
Absolutely. And actually, just that what you touched on a little bit there, about kind of seaweed as well. So we've kind of talked about the aquaculture side, and obviously we talk a good bit about fisheries across the podcast. Could you tell us a little bit about kind of how seaweed is managed in Ireland? It's how is it kind of working at the moment? Is it harvested? Is it deliberately grown in a farming method, or what way is it done?
Both, and this again is there's been traditional harvesting of seaweed done through the years. People have gathered seaweed off the shore for hundreds of years, to use as fertilizer. But more recently, the health benefits of seaweed as food additives and in cosmetics and in various different other applications, alginists that are used in medical products, has been kind of deemed to be worth kind of investigation, and a number of new industries have sprung up from that. So we think in terms of aquaculture as being either shellfish or salmon, finfish, but seaweed is now becoming a third area of aquaculture that's very important. So we're carrying out a number of projects looking at various different methods for assessing seaweed in the marine, and also just the socioeconomic value of seaweed harvesting and the various different activities that are carrying out in that sector. So it's a new area, and again, something that will have to be planned for and worked through in the future.
And now this is something that gets me really excited. God knows why, but I find seaweed fascinating. So just in case any of our other listeners have the same excitement as I do, is there anywhere on the Marine Institute website or anything that they can read about kind of those researcher studies that are going on at the moment, or is it still kind of in progress?
Yeah, if you go onto the Marine Institute website, at the top of the website, there is a search box, and if you put in seaweed or seaweed harvesting in there, you get some information there. So there's a number of different bits on our website about that.
Actually, and just as a general plug, I would recommend the website. It's fantastic for kind of both education for any age group, and also just for finding out more about what the Marine Institute do. So, Joe, I'm going to ask you one more question, and thank you so much for being with us today. We've been asking this of every guest that comes on the podcast, which is if you could give one little tidbit for our listeners of something that they can do today to help protect our oceans.
Yeah, I think when you think about that, I think just more interaction with the marine is something that I would encourage. We have a fantastic environment there. We have industries that are growing in the marine day by day, and just get down there, get it. This is oceans of learning. We're trying to encourage people to interact more with the sea, and just get out there and see what's going on. And finally, we were just talking there about planning. I think looking to the future, again, marine spatial planning is very important, and the whole area of aquaculture licensing and delivering factual information to inform government and public. It's part of our job. So interact with the information that we're putting out there on our website.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Joe. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you, Finn.
Renewable energy from our oceans, both wind and wave, has huge potential for the marine economy. One leader of the charge in this area is Patricia Comiskey, Ocean Energy Programme Manager at the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland.
Say I grew up by the seas, so I've always had a real interest in the marine. My dad was in the Navy Reserves, which is called SLUA Marine. And so he had a real keen interest in sailing. And he bought a little boat and we used to go out sailing together, and I think that's where my real grow came from. And then when I went to college and I studied zoology and specialized in marine biology and got the chance to join the college diving club, etc. So yeah, I think I've always had a huge interest in the marine space, and yeah, it's a real passion.
Very cool. And so obviously we're going to talk about it in a little bit. You work in renewables now, but before you were working with BIM, so Board Isciwara, so that's the fisheries. Yeah. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so when I finished my master's in Aberdeen, I kind of came back to Ireland and looked around for opportunities. And I think at the time I was really lucky. There was a real boom in kind of opportunities in this space. And I managed to secure a role with BIM where I worked on the common fisheries policy was being reviewed. Oh, cool. And basically I secured a role to support that work. So it was a kind of a review that was happening with the industry and the department, and the Marine Institute were involved. So it gave me a real deep insight into the complexities of marine policy. So I kind of stayed in that space, and I ended up working in a European project called Regional Advisory Councils, which are now just the advisory councils. And these councils bring fishermen and NGOs and government policymakers together to try and create appropriate policies for the fisheries sector. So it was a really great space to learn about kind of how to collaborate and how to inform best policy, and I suppose how to listen to stakeholders and understand where the challenges and the concerns are from all different sides. So yeah, I was really lucky in my career in BIM. I learned so much from my 10 years there.
That's really cool. And especially, I guess, looking at such a big piece of legislation like that, there's just so many stakeholders involved. It's a great way to learn to kind of work with so many different moving parts and different parties. And then obviously, more recently, the opportunity came up to work in renewables, and you kind of, sorry, I love a good pun, you made the switch. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so actually, when I first moved into SEAI, I actually wasn't working in the ocean space. I was working in energy efficiency. And I suppose the good thing was it gave me a real keen understanding of where the challenges were from the point of view of, I suppose, encouraging people to understand what they could do at an individual level to kind of reduce impact on the environment and reduce their energy needs. So I worked for a number of years in the energy efficiency space, both with the homeowners and looking at kind of encouraging mechanisms for homeowners to upgrade their homes, but also with communities and with utilities. So with the likes of ESB, Airgrid, Energia, Electricity, looking at how we could influence the utilities to support kind of energy efficiency projects. So again, I was really lucky. I had a kind of a very good introduction into that whole space and opportunities to really learn on my feet. And then basically an opportunity came up in the ocean energy team, which at the time was being led by Owen Sweeney. And I think Owen was such a huge influence in this space. He did a lot of really, really great work to move things on for Ireland. And he had, again, come from the Marine Institute into SEAI and kind of had driven that program for a number of years. But he actually retired. So there was, I suppose, a gap within the program for kind of others to come into it. Yep. So I came in soon after Owen retired into that program to try and lead on some of the work the really good work he had started.
Fantastic. And I guess, so I myself actually work up in Killybegs in the fisheries port there. And it's been just really interesting to see in the last kind of 2 years while I've been there, we're watching a lot of the kind of construction happening for offshore wind farms. Could you just tell me a little bit about maybe Ireland's potentials with offshore renewables or kind of what's happening in that sector?
So a piece of work that would have, again, which Owen would have started, and I suppose I was lucky to maybe implement, was the Offshore Renewable Energy Development Plan. So that was a piece of work that would have started back around 2010, but got commissioned and published in 2014. And it was looking at how we could, the actions and activities that need to be done in order to progress offshore renewable energy for Ireland. And the studies that had been done to underpin the plan indicated a 70 gigawatt potential for Ireland within 100 nautical miles of our coast.
And so maybe just for our listeners, what does that
70
kind of mean? Yeah, what does it mean?
It means a lot of energy.
Cool.
So basically, what like our current electricity needs in Ireland, our national electricity needs 5 gigawatts. So that's our peak natural our national need. Yep. So 70 is obviously significant, 14 times of that. Yeah. So, or 70, excuse me, is 14 times of that. So, you know, there's massive potential off our coasts. And basically that plan set in place a number of actions and activities that needed to be done in order to try and deliver on it. And primarily the initial actions and activities were around upgrading the consenting and licensing process to allow for activities to happen offshore. There's, again, a very complex policy area. Yeah. And it is a piece of work that is very much being driven by both our own department and the Department of Housing and Local Government and Heritage to upgrade the consenting rules that are in place to allow for offshore renewables. But in more recent years, the government has, I suppose, really jumped on to this, has really seen the potential and realized the potential for this space in order to meet our carbon emission, our targets, our European targets for reducing carbon emissions.
And kind of what would be our, in terms of like what we're producing through, say, wind energy and stuff now versus obviously the things that I'm seeing that are being constructed. What's our kind of timeline on that? I think you can talk about.
Our current timeline is 2030. We have a target to meet in 2030, which is to reduce our emissions against our baseline of 1995 by, the target is actually 55%, but we've set 70% because we basically didn't meet our 2020 targets. So from a government perspective, they have decided to increase our ambitions. And part of that is to, as I say, to make up for what we haven't been able to achieve so far. We have done a lot on the electricity side, in fairness, but there's been other areas where we haven't been able to meet our targets. So basically, we're planning to reduce our emissions by 70%, and part of the solution to do that is introducing significant offshore projects off the coast. And by that, I mean the plan at the moment is for us to have 5 gigawatts of projects off the Irish coast by 2030.
Amazing. And is there any kind of, like, obviously we've seen before, maybe, and like you touched on it there with the kind of heritage or development groups onshore, maybe wanting to see the push towards offshore. Is there any obstacles for that at the moment, or is that kind of going ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's certainly challenges. I think there are challenges that can be overcome, but we need to work smartly on them. So as I mentioned, there is a lot of effort being put into improving the consenting regime and ensuring that that's fit for purpose in order to support these projects. And the consenting regime will be put in place, will be for all activities, offshore activities, but ORE or offshore renewable at the moment, it's a kind of, I suppose, certainly a priority for us that legislation is in place to support that. The other area that a lot of focus has been on over the last 2 years is on our grid capacity and what needs to be done to update the grid capacity in order to support offshore renewables. And that is basically both the grid going out to the projects, so offshore grid capacity, but also onshore, what's needed to strengthen the grid in order to accommodate this additional energy need. And then the third piece of work that's very much being progressed is looking at how these projects can be funded in the long term and how we can get significant benefit for the Irish consumer in these projects. So it's a scheme called the RES scheme, which the department are running, which looks at, I suppose, providing a guaranteed price for electricity going forward. So there's been a lot of that kind of work being done in the background.
I guess drawing from your own passion and your background in your career, as kind of one last question, a takeaway for our listeners, could you give them maybe some tip or idea, something they can implement now to kind of help protect our oceans or our environment?
Yeah, so I suppose for the oceans, I think we are all part of a bigger system. And certainly in SEAI, we'd always talk about energy efficiency first. I think the biggest threat to biodiversity is climate change. So if we can try and reduce our own energy needs, our own energy uses, I think that will help any part of our environment. I think our maintaining our biodiversity is and bolstering it is so important. So I think as an individual looking at your own carbon footprint, I think is always really, really important, and trying to challenge yourself there. Specifically, the one thing that I always, I suppose, hate to see, and I think we all do, is litter. So if we could all, again, reduce our own litter, which does end up in the sea in many cases. And like even that at an individual level, kind of collecting your own waste and bringing it home and making sure you don't leave it on the beach, like really simple things. I think if people can stick to those things, it makes
Absolutely. Patricia, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. Really appreciate your time.
No problem, Finn. It was lovely to talk to you.
So guys, that's it for this episode of the Oceans of Learning podcast. We have heard from such a great range of speakers there today, all about their connection to the ocean and how they work with it. For the next episode, we will be focusing in specifically more on climate change. If you have been enjoying the podcast, do rate, review, subscribe. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else. I'm Finn Bandar, and we hope to see you next time.
Oceans of Learning, the podcast celebrating our seas and Ireland's marine resource, is presented by the Marine Institute. To find out more, go to marine.ie.